He says you can rely on it. I'll give you a few examples of how you see Islam now. Our fiqh is not against science. Number one, we know that every day we have to pray at certain times. We have to pray at Fajr. And Fajr is a certain time. There's a white light you see in the sky about an hour and a half before sunrise. Dhuhr, it's when the sun is in the middle of the sky. We have to pray. When it's at night, when it's sunset, we have to pray. Now, back then, you'll find the ulama, they used to give old styles of how to figure out it's Dhuhr, it's Fajr. Now, we don't have to rely on those ways anymore. You'll find all the ulama, they'll tell you that you can rely on science, technology, and figuring out what time Dhuhr is, what time Fajr is. Nobody right now goes and looks for, for that white light of Fajr, or to see if the sun is in the middle of the sky. No, now we have scientific methods that are accurate. That's why we rely on them. And that's why you see there's sheets of every month, and they'll tell you, I can tell you next year when Dhuhr will be. Why? Because we are utilizing science. So we rely on science on that. Number two, and this is a very controversial topic, the topic of the hilal, the crescent. You see, many ulama, they tell you before, that you have to see the crescent in order for the month to begin, whether it be the beginning of the month of Ramadan, or the end of Ramadan, or any other month. But you see, now, most ulama, including Sayyid Sistani, he says you don't have to see it. He says the point is you have to know that it's visible. The crescent is visible. So if science can accurately predict the visibility of the moon, you could rely on that. Now the problem with it is scientists themselves, they'll tell you that our methods of predicting the visibility of the moon in your area is not 100% accurate. I've asked scientists that predict this, they'll tell you this is 70%. Sometimes they'll tell you, yes, tonight 100%. But at times they'll tell you 70%. So because it's not certain, because it's not accurate 100%, that's why some ulama, they don't rely on it. But if it was 100% accurate, then we would rely on it. So science relies on, Islam relies on science when it comes to the visibility of the moon. If 100% science says that it's visible, we can rely, nobody has to see it. Number three, DNA. The ulama, they say, because DNA, many ulama, because DNA gives certainty, because it's accurate 100% or 99.99%, then we can rely on DNA in knowing who the father, for example, of this child is, or any other matter that has to do with DNA. So these are scientific methods that all of our ulama say we can rely on when it comes to our religious matters. So Islam was never a religion that was against science. In fact, it encourages science and it accepts new scientific methods in figuring out our religious affairs. Now, when we come to the leaders of our religion, the leaders of Islam, you find our Imams, Rasulullah, Ahlul Bayt, they were never far from science as well. You find that they had the knowledge of all the scientific just a quick announcement, there are two cars that are parked in front of the store, video difference. So whoever parked there, if they could please go and move the car because this is causing a problem. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Our Imams alayhimus salam, Rasulullah, you find they were never distant from science. You see, we believe that they were connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them all the knowledge of all the sciences. And that's why you see the Imams, they were so much ahead of their time. Yes, you see Imam al-Sadiq, for example. Imam al-Sadiq was not just a scholar in religion. Many people, who's Imam al-Sadiq? He's a alim, he's our leader in religion. Imam al-Sadiq did not just teach religion for your information. Unfortunately, many of the followers of Ahlul Bayt don't know this. Excuse me. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he was a man that had mastered all the sciences of the time. He used to teach science to his students. He used to teach, he was a professor in chemistry, in mathematics, in astronomy, in physics, in medicine, and he used to teach all of that to his students. Like I said, Jabir ibn Hayyan was one of the greatest chemist of his time, he says, I was a student of Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq, and I learned whatever I learned from him. He says in a very famous quote, he says, تعلمت من أستاذي جعفر بن محمد علما لو شئت جعلت منه الأرض ذهبا. He says, I have learned from my teacher, Imam al-Sadiq, something in chemistry, alchemy, that I can turn the entire world into gold with it. This is the word of Jabir ibn Hayyan, the chemist. And he says, I learned this from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. But unfortunately, we don't know this about our imams. Our imams, as we say, madlumeen. We don't know too much about them, because nobody has put the spotlight on Imam al-Sadiq. We're too busy, preoccupied reading the ahadith of Imam al-Sadiq about halal and haram. You see, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam has so much contributions in science. And in fact, you see, about 30, 40 years ago, we Muslims are in a different world. We don't take the time to learn about our leaders. Other people come and they learn about our leaders more than us. Isn't that unfortunate? You see, about 30, 40 years ago, there's a university in France by the name of Strasbourg University in France. And they decided to form a research committee to study the life of Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq, but not as a scholar, not as a religious person, as a scientist. That's how they looked upon him. Ja'far ibn Muhammad, the scientist. So they studied, they researched, and it comprised of so many professors of all over the world, from the US, Canada, Britain, from Germany, France. They all took part in this committee, and in the end they wrote a thesis, a paper, a book, about Imam al-Sadiq in French, and now you could read it in English and Arabic. In English it's called Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq, the great Muslim scientist and philosopher. And in Arabic also, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, كما عرفه علماء الغرب. It's on the internet. So what they said in the end, they wrote the thesis about Imam al-Sadiq. They said that we were appalled at the accomplishments of Imam al-Sadiq. That this person was not just a man of religion, he was a scientist. They said that, I read this all in this book. And Imam al-Sadiq, he had lots of theories. Theories that were ahead of his time. For example, I'll give you a few. Now, if you were to ask anyone, just search it on the internet, ask the world of scientists, who discovered that the world rotates around the sun and it revolves? Who discovered that? They'll tell you it's either Galileo and someone else by the name of Copernicus, right? Search it on Google. You'll find nowhere, obviously they'll mention the name Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq. Who's he? He's not even a scientist, he's a scholar. He's an alim of religion. Now in this book, these professors, in their thesis, they said, we found in the works of Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq that he states, I have a theory that says that the world is not flat, it's round, contrary to everyone's belief back then. The world revolves around the sun and it rotates. It revolves and it rotates around the sun. He said this 1300 years ago. Obviously nobody's going to come and say it's Ja'far ibn Muhammad. Why? We Muslims don't care about him. We shouldn't expect the others to care about our Imam. Why? Because the Imam's legacy is lost. We don't even know it. You want the others to know it? You want the enemies? You want the non-Muslims to know it? So when his legacy is lost, Galileo is going to tell him, say, I discovered it. Imam al-Sadiq says it, and a few students write it, and it's written in a few books on a shelf, and dust is on that. It's piling up on that shelf. So obviously nobody's going to know that. Number two, who discovered oxygen? Exists in the air. Type it on the internet, you'll find a man by the name of Carl Scheele. In the 1700s, he discovered oxygen that exists in the air. In this book, these researchers said that we discovered in the works of Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq that he said oxygen exists in the air. But no one credits that to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. You see, this is the madlumiyya. This is how we have oppressed the Imams. And we have not cared to even read about it, to educate myself before I educate others. This is the legacy of our Imams. It's gone. The Imams were scientists before. And then they list so many other things, how he has a theory of light, Imam al-Sadiq, that led to the invention of binoculars and telescopes. The theory was to Imam al-Sadiq, and they mentioned so many other theories. I advise all of you to read this book. You can find it on the internet. So our Imams were scientists before they were religious scholars. But nobody takes the time to read about this. Their legacy is lost. And that's why they're not credited with this. Other people got credited. The Imams, first of all, they didn't have time to speak too much about science. You might ask, why didn't they, speak more about it if they had the knowledge from Allah? First of all, they were too preoccupied teaching people how to pray, teaching people about their faith. So they had a priority of faith, religion. And the rest was, if they had extra time, they would put it to other studies. Number two, you find the authorities during the times of the Imams did not allow the Imams to freely teach. They were harassed, they were imprisoned. Many of the Imams, they did not have the opportunity, and that's why you see, we only got glimpses from Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib's knowledge because he ruled for a few years. We saw the knowledge of Ahlul Bayt coming out. And Imam al-Sadiq, because what? Because Bani al-Abbas and Bani al-Umayyah were busy fighting. So Imam al-Sadiq, he had some freedom to speak. That's why the knowledge of Ahlul Bayt began to show. And even if the Imam had freedom, you find most people, they did not handle the knowledge of the Imam. Imagine if the Imam, there's a tradition from Imam Ali. He tells his companions one day, there's a waterfall, there's water. And he tells them, I have a knowledge that I could create light out of this water. He tells them, but he doesn't tell them how. They're not going to understand it. He's way ahead of them, thousands of years. Now we understand that, they can make light from waterfalls. From water, you can make energy. You can make electricity. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says that 100,000 years ago. But why didn't he say it? Because first of all, people won't get it. They won't understand what he's talking about. It'll be nonsense to them. Second of all, they won't handle it. They're telling me, this is junk. What you're saying is nonsense. Because it's too ahead of their time. And that's why you find Imam Ali himself, he says in one tradition, he tells Kumail one day, when he is giving him advice, he tells him, Ya Kumail, إنها هنا لعلما جما لو أصبت له حمل. He says, here in my chest, there's so much knowledge. It's killing me because I can't tell it to anybody. The knowledge that I'm giving you, this is 1 out of 1,000,000 that I have. The rest, there isn't enough, there isn't people that are suitable for me to tell them. People won't handle if I tell them such things. Their minds are so limited, they won't understand it. لو أصبت له حملا. In another tradition, he says, وَلَقَدْ, he says, Allahu Akbar. This is so beautiful. He shows us